Welcome everyone. My name is Bo Bruskern. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Land It FinTech, and today it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Mark Toft, who is co-founder and partner in the Narrator Group. I'm going to give a quick intro about Mark, let him talk a little bit about his background, and then we'll kick it off with Q&A. Just everyone knows the rules here. Please go ahead and click on the Q&A button, ask questions. I'll be monitoring that as we go. I have about 6 hours worth of questions here, so I'll try to work yours in as well. We've only got an hour. And then weather permitting, we'll go to overtime. So new URL today, so don't go to the old one. Mark. So Mark Toft grew up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And was a cattle rustler, ranch hand as a kid, went to Stanford, graduated in '93, later got his MFA, that's Master of Fine Arts, not Master of Finance, and that is from Washington University in St. Louis. He received that degree in '98, and he's worked in the public sector and the private sector, mainly private sector, and serving companies on narrative and story for 25 years. Companies large and small, FedEx, American Express, and CenturyLink, Ball, and then international airports, breweries, ski resorts. Like, he's covered all the fun stuff and probably some not fun stuff too. But his specialty, his expertise is really in narrative. Now, Mark wrote a book, Authenticity, Building a Brand in an Insincere Age. And what timing to have this book in my hands. This has been a great book. And let me just tell everyone a little bit about the book, because it's actually different, and I think certainly was very impactful for me as essentially a brand manager. I mean, I'm running Land It FinTech, and brand means a lot to every entrepreneur, every business owner. This book has 81 chapters in it. Each one is about 1 to 3 pages in length, and there's a key takeaways. You could literally, at the end of each chapter, you can vote right there, key takeaways. And you could literally read this book in about 15 minutes if pressed for time. But the stories that are inside the book are so insightful and so interesting to read that just going to the key takeaways, that's helpful. But reading through what builds to that key takeaway is super insightful and wonderful to read. So, so Mark, I'm gonna just hand the conch to you, let you do a little bit of an introduction, fill in anything that I might have missed in that very brief bio, and then we'll kick off some Q&A.
Sounds great. It's really a pleasure to be here with you, Bo, and I'm grateful to everyone who is on and listening. And what a wonderful literary reference there with handing me the conch, a nice little Lord of the Flies reference there. And I know that people may not know about you, that you are quite the literary guy with a background in fiction. So I think you understand a lot of what is driving this book, Authenticity. What I would say about it is that, much like I'm sure in your industries, in finance, the thing that drove me to write that book was that, one day I woke up and I was not young anymore. I was sort of old-ish. I have all this experience, and there was so much malpractice in the branding and advertising world that my co-founder of Narrator Group and I looked at. And we wanted to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff as much as possible. The branding industry, like a lot of industries, has a lot of stuff that is cladded onto it like barnacles on a boat that really need to be scraped off. Brand consultants aren't serving their clients very well, because they're kind of, and I was with a firm that was certainly guilty of this when I was younger. They're complexifying in order to profit. It's got to feel like an A effort. You got to give someone a 100-page deck to say, bam, here's your brand. Well, no one can operationalize something like that, and it doesn't help. Really, branding in its essence should be something that simplifies and clarifies. It should be a liberating force for any company. So that's something I could go into a little bit more detail about, what brand really is in its essence. The best way to think about branding, I found in about 3 years of doing this, is a brand establishes your purpose, and your marketing and advertising takes that purpose and assembles it into a compelling story to an audience based on solving a problem. So brand is about essence and about what people experience from your company or your brand, and advertising is how you put that into a campaign that people understand. And I can talk a little bit about what I mean by authenticity too, but I don't want to just hog the conch. Let me pass it back to you there, Peter. And I think his name was Peter in Lord of the Flies, wasn't it? I might not have my characters memorized.
I don't have the characters memorized. I apologize. That is one step beyond my level. But we are going to I have another literary reference for you, and actually a movie reference that you pulled into your book. I'm going to save it for later, but it is one of the best one-liners of all time. So storytelling, that is something that I think a lot of people are talking about. And like you said, there's a lot of malpractice out there, and there's great examples of financial service firms. As you may or may not know, we serve the banking community, fintech and bank innovators, people that are putting your bank on your phone, people that are making it easier to save, easier to or easier to spend wisely. The whole breadth of financial services, and that does seem to be a place where there's not a lot of great storytelling. But what's your take on storytelling especially right now in this moment, and has it changed?
Yeah, I'll speak broadly of how I think it's misused and how it can be used well and effectively for companies. A lot of consultants will come in, and now it wasn't enough to talk about storytelling. Now they're saying, now you got to talk about story being and story doing. That just is more complexifying, because then you've got companies charting, okay, who's our protagonist, who's our antagonist, what's the plot point? And anyone who has written a story knows that you never go about it that didactically. Storytelling is really just a guide and not a skeleton key. It should be something that disciplines your messaging. As any good writer knows, it's just a way to check yourself of asking, what's at stake, and so what? Does this matter to the audience that I'm talking to? And is this a good story? Is this the best story I can tell? So storytelling, broadly applied, should be something that just disciplines your branding and messaging by asking very basic questions. Do I understand what's the conflict that I'm addressing? What's the problem that I'm solving? Who's involved? Who am I talking to? And where is this going? What is the desired end goal? What's the destination that you want to, bring people towards? So it's really just a way to discipline your messaging. Too often, I think people think storytelling has to be, either that over-leaden thing, or they'll say, well, we've got to have this precise transcription of founded in 1970 with these two people in a basement. And yeah, well, you notice that Apple and HP don't tell those stories anymore because it's not necessarily the most interesting story. That's what I would call a creation story of a company. That's one story companies can tell, but that's not always the most interesting one. The most interesting story you can tell is the one that is meaningful to your audience, to whose problem that you solve. So that's basically it.
Two quick follow-ups on that. One is you mentioned your audience is not a demographic, right? So it's not moms age 40 to 45. It's what is it? And if it's not that.
It is, think of your audience as a person in context of a problem that you solve for them, or someone who's confronted with a situation. Any great story, the hero is confronted by a challenge that he or she has to overcome. So your audience is someone who is confronting something that has to be resolved, whether it's they need a better tasting hamburger or they need better financial advice.
Okay, and so then on the other follow-up, what was it? the old Silicon Valley creation story.
Mhm.
So no elevator pitch was complete or really ever even started without the creation story, right? I was sitting on my couch. Oh, I needed better content. And so I founded Netflix. Like that, as I look back on my days in Silicon Valley and like that whole thing, they were all fabricated.
Yeah.
Like, even the eBay story about like selling Beanie Babies, a famous fiction, right? I mean, it was not right. It was not real. So, and that really stuck out at me as I was reading your book, because we at Lend It were very, very guilty of that. You rewind a couple months ago, and our About Us page had literally like pages of content about, and then we did this conference, and 973 people showed up, and you know, so and so took the stage, and oh boy, was it boring to read. It was boring for us. It was boring for us to read.
Yeah, that's getting caught in the details rather than the real founding purpose and, you know, your reason for being. You know, you don't have to fabricate a creation story for your reason for being to be you know, authentic and genuine. But yeah.
Right, and I would say probably if you don't have a reason for being that's authentic and genuine, then you don't have a reason for being.
You know, right. It can't just be, that's my problem with this. There's another chapter in the book that talks about creation over disruption. Disruption is something that I see tripping up a lot more clients whom I'm advising. And it's easy to get carried into any new wave that passes through. I mean, we're social creatures, but we're seeing a dramatic evidence of that now. How easy it is to be carried into something. But a shorthand for this product matters is to say this is disruptive. And an old friend of mine, Mike Maples, who's a pretty well-known VC guy at Floodgate in the Bay Area still. He graduated from Stanford a few more years before I did. But he said, you know, he talks about creation and the joy of creating being the thing that really drives innovation. He talked about the guys at Lyft, for instance. He said they didn't create Lyft in order to destroy taxis. They created Lyft in order to transcend taxis. It was this joy of creation and finding a better solution. So disruption is something that almost happens on your way to the forum. That's something that happens after you've succeeded, almost by accident, as opposed to that being the founding, or that being the primary motivation. You know, that's really creation, the joy of creation versus there's sort of a resentment inherent, I think, to disruption that can, if you're not careful, can disfigure your motives as.
I'm just giggling inside because as I see the audience here, and there's a woman in the audience, Meg Zwick, and I'm going to call her out and say she probably remembers that a predecessor to like a couple generations before, but what sort of gave birth to Lend It was a company called Disruption. And I was one of the co-founders of that company. And I came home and I was like, yeah, kids, my new company, it's called Disruption. And my kids hated the name. They're like, Dad, that's awful. You can't be a disruptor. Because that's bad in the classroom. You don't want to be the disruptor. And in your case, you're saying it's a little bit of a different twist on it, but it still rings true. And that company went down in flames, rightly so. It was all those adjectives you were using to describe what disruption is as opposed to creation.
That's funny, boy.
Pretty much what we're living.
I had no idea you actually had it in your title.
Yeah, it was terrible. Yeah. So you have an outside perspective. You're not, and you serve a lot of different industries, like I mentioned in the intro. And sometimes it's easier to raise other kids than your own, or at least to sort of point out the faults in other kids. And so what could you say, maybe comment about your view of financial services and the messaging that is maybe prevalent, or maybe there might be great shining examples of positive storytelling, and there may be negative, but play around in that financial services world as an outsider for a minute.
You bet. I think there is a big opportunity in financial services to emulate or learn some of the lessons from the insurance industry. about 10 years ago, the insurance industry ranked pretty much at the bottom of consumer attitudes about brands. When you think about insurance, I mean, it's a necessary thing, but it's kind of a utility. I mean, it's something we unfortunately have to have in order to live. We got to insure our home, and we don't want it to burn down and flatten us, or car insurance. But customers were not well disposed towards it. They saw it as this necessary evil that they had to pay for, they had to invest in. But something happened gradually over time that insurance companies got better at differentiating their brands. And some of it is a little bit kind of on the cheap in terms of cheeky advertising, but they did find a way to make their brands more relatable and more, I should say, winning and more human, where I think people, people feel very well disposed towards Esurance, towards Progressives, toward Geico, although I think Geico is really pushing it with message saturation and almost too much, because people are saying, boy, they sure have a lot of money to advertise. But the banking and financial industry, USAA, I think, has the best reputation that I know of the bigs, of the major brands, which is understandable because I think their purpose is pretty well understood. Bank of America is singled out in my book as an example of a brand that has behaved with terrific inauthenticity. That's very well known. And friends of mine who bank with them have experienced it again with the PPP loans and all kinds of problems there. Their problem is that they advertise against who they really are. They put out these very heartwarming campaigns about how they're with their customers and what matters to you and all this stuff. But in reality, their practices don't line up with their preaching. Wells Fargo, I think, is getting better. They were in a pretty tough spot. I know that they were delayed on PPP because of the fake accounts they had. A couple million fake accounts for small businesses. The mistake they made is that they came out and ran a campaign basically saying, we made a mistake, which I think is a great thing to do, to express that vulnerability, which is something that we talk about in the book, Brand Vulnerability. Domino's did that beautifully by acknowledging they read bad reviews of their pizzas. Tastes like cardboard. The sauce tastes like ketchup. Brutal stuff that people were saying about them, and they read them aloud, and they had the chefs read them aloud and said, we got to do better. We got to go back to the drawing board and redo our recipes, and they would roll them out to customers. At that point, their stock went through the roof. I mean, people came back and tried. People love the underdog, but people don't like the insincere apology. Wells Fargo made matters worse by having an apology campaign that came across as insincere to people. I do think financial services, lending, it's way more of a dream fulfiller than the insurance company. So already I feel like finance should be in a position to do even better than the insurance industry in terms of customer perceptions.
And I just don't feel like there's been a lot of great successes in our field in terms of that. I mean, and now there are literally thousands and thousands of startups out there that have good stories, that are telling good narratives and all that. But and so I can get lost in a sea of messaging there. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's a like carte blanche, we're just terrible at messaging. But those brands, those giant brands that have the capital to put, messaging out there in all the media options that we have, they're going to be the big four banks, and then few others. SoFi has had some big campaigns in the past, but I just don't feel like any of it is really brilliant marketing. And so let me ask you this on. Let's bring in one of the other concepts that you have in your book so that we can kind of, touch on that throughout our conversation. That is this concept of the hill you defend. Mm-hmm. And it may be that these giant banks are unclear about the hill they defend. Certainly kind of seems that way. Because I was looking at that Bank of America, where is it in my notes? They've got a marketing page, like a resource center for their new brand, The Power to Make a Difference. And right, in their newsroom, they say, at Bank of America, we are guided by a common purpose to help make financial lives better through the power of every connection. I mean, I'm really not trying to pile on here, but I don't know what that means. And I think we're all at fault for slipping into this kind of lingo. But what is that? What hill are they defending if they're trying to talk about the power of every connection? What does that mean to you? And how would you frame it?
That's a great question. In fact, I think they're confusing what they're saying with sort of how they should say versus what they want to say. Really, the hill they defend, and it's a similar idea in Jim Collins's book, The Hedgehog Concept, or Simon Sinek has The Golden Circle, which is another great way to think about it. Find your why. The hill you defend is something that my business partner and I have been using with our clients, and it's that first and final hill that you will defend and die on, and it really gets to the purpose of your brand. And it's best, I think, companies start to be tempted by clever sounding taglines, and they get these sirens of advertising, bring them onto the rocky shores of we got to have something that sounds like a snappy tagline, like The Power to Connect. It doesn't actually say anything, and there is a chapter in the book that says avoid these words, and we go through a bunch of taglines out there, and it's staggering how many taglines say what matters most. How, we have the lifelines, the power of blank is everywhere, connecting is everywhere, and so it becomes part of this white noise that's out there in marketing, where customers, it just kind of washes over them. They don't. There's nothing for them to cling to. It sounds familiar, so it sounds like advertising. It is advertising, but you ask them 5 minutes later, they don't remember it, and they don't know what it means. Taglines ought to be something that happen on the other end of a campaign. So really, establishing the hill you defend should be very focused, very single-pointed kind of strategy line. And then once you develop a campaign, all the good taglines I've been involved in the development of or have written are the perfect period to the end of a perfect radio spot or a perfect TV commercial. It's the only concluding sentence that you can have, where it sums up everything that you just saw or everything you just heard. The problem is that a lot of companies flip that. We need a tagline and we need a logo, and then we'll have a brand. Well, that doesn't work, because you end up writing something like The Power to Connect, and then you have to sort of dry lab your way back into an ad campaign, which just sort of is wordplay on the word's power, but it really ought to be, let's think of really strategically, single-pointed, what do we stand for? What do we live and die for? How do we express that in a compelling story? And then what's the perfect single-sentence punctuation? And it is amazing how many times I've been involved with brands whether it's with Staples or CenturyLink, where that tagline did not emerge until you could read a 30-second, and this is the best way I think to do it, read a 30-second radio spot and then put that tagline on there, and it's just, there it is. That's the cherry on the sundae. It's never what matters most to you. It's never The Power to Connect. It's never the lifelines, all those other things.
Does it also bother you that it's that we could say that the power of every connection could apply to Intel and TikTok and United Airlines? And I mean, does that bother you? Is that a part of it?
That's another excellent point about it. It's very inexact and very not native necessarily to finance. All kinds of brands connect. As you say, actually I would say it's better for a telco provider,
right,
than for a bank. It's a better fit. But even if you find a more elegant way to say it, I think they haven't found it. They got to keep hunting.
I think they might have to hire you.
I
don't know if we have any Big Four bankers on the call right here, but or on the in the audience. But hopefully they're paying attention if we do. But actually, forget the Big Four. Let's talk about community banks. I mean, there's some champions out there, right? That we, like many others, had a pretty terrible experience with PPP with our big four bank. And then we switched. We found a community bank in Colorado that could serve us, worked on Easter Sunday, uploaded our forms to the SBA, and
Wow.
got our loan like 7 days or 10 days later. So we were, by Easter Monday, we were like, I think we're good. I think we're going to survive. Because as you know, our business kind of got demolished by, becoming illegal overnight. So we, in all the conversations I had with many, many bankers during that couple of month period, and of course they're ongoing, we feel like while banks in general, the trust factor has gone up several points in the past several months, and that goes across the board, large banks and small. And that comes directly from Mindy Hauptman, who we interviewed a couple of weeks ago. She's from BCG, and she had done this study. And so trust in banks is going up, but I would say it's probably not uniform. And I think that this is a moment for community banks, where community banks are really shining. Now, how, given their limited budgets, they've got to invest a lot in technology right now. They can't spend a lot on marketing. What can they do to take advantage of this moment where they are shining, and they got to get, it would serve them well to send this message out.
That's a great question, Bo. And I'll just a small anecdote with my own company. We had concluded to leave one of the big four. We started with them 9 years ago. We found this company, and we were having such, we didn't have an individual. We did not have a Dan or a Debbie or a John or a Bob we could talk to. There wasn't a human being. It was this big faceless company. We were trying to get some of our PPP process. And at the last minute, a woman based out of Phoenix came through and became my customer representative. Now we're in Denver. And so she wasn't my local representative. She sort of saved that big bank's, my loyalty for a little longer. But the general feeling before that was, as soon as this crisis is passed and we kind of get our canoe ported to the next river, we are going down the hill to Golden, and we're signing up with a local bank. And I think that's probably still our plan. We're going to go local. You've probably heard this phrase before too, and maybe it comes from when I advised governors in Wyoming, which they're known for their kind of earthy language. They talk about being within choking distance of your public officials. And that keeps them honest. If you're in choking distance, you know that they're not going to betray you. And I think, at least a handshake distance would sure be nice for a bank. So I think community banks are in a great position to be that face, that handshake, and even that neck that needs to be gently choked, if not, really choked. So what can they do in terms of storytelling? I think a very focused message that doesn't necessarily sound like all the other ads. So get a very focused why, understand what makes your company distinctive. What's great now in the financial world, and we do a lot of video work and for our clients. And when I first got into advertising, and I confess I miss these days. I miss the $1 million a day budgets and sitting there with craft services in Santa Monica, and you'd hire people to film a 30-second commercial, and you got to stay at the nicest hotels. All that's gone. I mean, it's amazing how affordable, high quality video production has become, TV production. Now, and there's really, and I'm getting to, within media, community banks, if you get a really good message and you get some good advice and you get some great creative content, it's amazing how targeted you can be now with what's broadly called action-based digital. Used to be, with even a couple of years ago, we would bring a campaign to life for a client, and then we would have a media buy, which was our media planners would go, so we're going to place banner space on this website, which is appropriate. And then you would have banners on that website, and you would just hope that someone who, you wanted to buy your products would go to the website and see it flash up, and they would take an interest. Well, now you don't buy you don't buy space on particular websites anymore. You buy individuals. You buy, for instance, we've advised an airport in Wyoming that was trying to draw people up from Denver to fly American Airlines direct to Dallas rather than driving down to Denver to fly on American Airlines to Dallas to connect. People who lived in Wyoming could start in Cheyenne, fly direct to Dallas on American, and then connect anywhere. That's an airport with more connections than Denver has. We could actually, we went and found the people who had flown on American Airlines from DIA to Dallas in the last 6 months. And we served them up a really compelling 30-second video in this programmatic digital, dozens of times each. We chased them wherever they went. And we had proof that they had clicked on it or watched it all the way through. So we could find people, and like you said, as opposed to it being women age 45 to 60 who were business travelers, we found people who had flown that particular route that we could poach them from. And so the results were so much more effective, and you can really target an individual. It's a little bit, when I get into my regular life as a user, it's a little creepy because there's quite a breadcrumb trail, and it's amazing. You can say something and Messenger picks it up, and you're getting served. I'm getting served stuff on fishing boats. I'll mention fishing boats now, and I'll probably see a banner ad about it later. But I'm probably too promiscuous about leaving all my notifications on. But it's amazing how much you can buy, what targeting you can buy for very little budget. You don't have to buy mass media to get your message out there. I guess what I'm trying to say for community.
Yeah. So once you understand that hill you're going to defend, then you understand exactly who that person is. Like you said, in your example, the woman business traveler who wants to go from Cheyenne to Dallas, or access the world from Cheyenne. Easiest route.
Yeah.
Easiest route.
In Colorado or Wyoming, yeah, you don't have to drive to Denver anymore, right? Exactly.
Right. And then action-based digital is not a term I'm familiar with. I feel like I've kind of kept abreast, but this is a new term for me. So
based on your actions on the web, your buying patterns, if you go book a ticket on American Airlines, you've taken an action, and we can go after it.
And you can actually see that. I mean, obviously this is all above board, right? You're not, but you can tell that I've done that. So are you acquiring that information from a kayak or something of that nature? How are you getting that?
Well, yeah, it's something that my media buyer could better answer. And there's the, they're down in the galleys rowing the oars, and I understand kind of broadly how it works, but don't practice it. I let the experts practice it. They buy it usually through a Google exchange or other exchanges. So that's where Google's business model really makes sense. That then you can serve those ads up on, it doesn't go to bad websites or pornography website. It doesn't chase people wherever they go, but it chases them to just about every legitimate website out there. I think it's sometimes called programmatic digital as well as another word, and it might be my media might slap me after that. That's where you get some of the pre-roll ads when you look. But you're right. Once you find, and I think community banks, just to get back to, because I think in the idea of branding and marketing being something that should simplify rather than complexify your life, it should sharpen, give you more focus as opposed to another 100 things to worry about, like plot diagrams. Community banks have a great opportunity to tap into a real pain. It doesn't take much to convince people that there's a better way. You and I just recently experienced some frustration with the way that we were served. So you're not creating a product in search of a problem to solve. Community bank can provide something that is really needed and really appreciated and really pretty well understood. New software clients, some high-tech customers have it's hard to get to a really conversational lay way to describe what they do, because first you have to get through all the jargon and the buzzwords of an industry, whereas everyone understands loans, everyone understands kind of what a bank does. You don't have to reintroduce a whole new lexicon of how an industry works. So I think some of that legwork is already done for community banks, and the problem is there, and the need is there, and the desire is there.
And there's got to be, for those banks that are financial institutions that are brave enough, there's got to be a page we can take out of Domino's book where everyone understands a pizza, right? And for them to go out there and say boldly, and if I recall the story correctly, they were tanking when they did that campaign, and I don't think anyone really. I think there were a lot of doubters about that campaign, but that takes a lot of guts and vulnerability, which brings us to the immortal Lester Bangs.
Yeah, right.
from that great movie, Almost Famous. And when I read this, when I stumbled across this line in your book, it was kind of late at night, and I was reading with my little headlamp on, and I was like, oh geez, this is one of the best lines of all time. In fact, when I originally saw the movie, I think I rewound it 5 or 6 times so I could memorize that line right off the bat. But he said at the end of the film, the only true currency in this bankrupt world is what you share with someone else when you're uncool.
Yeah.
I just loved that.
It gives me hope still. I love it too.
That's great writing right there. And great acting too. So does that relate at all? I'm trying to tie this together with Pat Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, where he talks about vulnerability-based leadership, which of course is like, I just love that stuff. Does vulnerability in branding, is that tapping into the same thing that vulnerability in trust, vulnerability-based trust is tapping into, or are those just sharing the same word and 2 different concepts?
I think it's coming from the same root source. I think you're right. And because the book is called Authenticity, I do warn against people, things can always go wrong, like they did for failed attempts at vulnerability when it's insincere. If someone is donning the big cable knit sweater and let's have hugs and trust falls and all this stuff, and that actually repels, the insincere attempts at vulnerability, or I'm going to try to make myself cry, like like the character in Broadcast News who had to put powder in his eye to cry. I mean, people can tell when it's fake vulnerability, so it has to come from a genuine place. But usually, all of us who've lived a long time have experienced failures and death and heartbreak and all that. And you've got to carry that with you into your life, and not in a saccharine, weepy kind of way, but in a sense that you're a human being. One of the brands, I think, Bo, that I mentioned in that chapter does a great job is Spanx. I can't remember the founder, the woman who founded Spanx.
Sarah Blakely.
Sarah Blakely, that's right.
Yep.
And she talks a lot about vulnerability and how it has created a culture at her company. First of all, she says that it's her butt in the first product photos that they used. It was her, and I haven't seen it, but by her telling, it's her imperfect butt being bridled by the Spanx on the product page. But they also have weekly oops meetings, she says, which sound really fun. She said they all end up in uproarious laughter, which I think just takes the temperature down a lot. And it's something I've thought about doing here, because all of us have those moments where, that didn't go well, or I wish I hadn't said that. And I think if we operate out of a fear of making mistakes, that's the opposite of vulnerability, which is perfectionism, which is, is against the courage to be imperfect that Brene Brown talks about. So it's the courage to be imperfect. The courage to be imperfect enable Domino's to acknowledge people are hating our pizza. We've got to face it and invite them to give us another chance, which worked beautifully. Now, I don't think it's sustained that well over time, although they're still around. They were being left for dead like Apple was around the same time. So it is there, but it has to be much like cause-related marketing. It's prone to insincerity. And if insincere vulnerability, insincere cause-related marketing also deservedly backfires.
Yeah, I would say one caution here is, in reading your book, it doesn't sound easy. You're not sugarcoating anything. You're not making it sound easier than it is. But I would say anyone venturing into this space, you know, travel cautiously. It is hard to be sincere, period, right? You know, in our daily lives about very simple things.
Right.
And then to get up on stage and be sincere, I think is that much harder, because in the end we're afraid, right? We're all just deathly afraid of failure. And if I'm going to be vulnerable, I'm going to, like, by definition, I'm going to admit to failure.
Yeah, you know, one of the stories that I wanted to share, one of the formative encounters I had early on, I was advising a governor of Wyoming. I was kind of a young punk. I was home from Stanford, thought I had come back to my cow herding state and you know, solve all their problems. And I was meeting with the governor there and talking about his messaging, and he looked at me very evenly. He was this brilliant man. He's still alive. He's no longer governor, but and he sounded like Sling Blade a little bit. He had this really gravelly voice, but just a really high IQ Sling Blade. You know, that. And I was going on and on about stuff, and he just looked at me and says, "Kid, they can't get my goat if they don't know where it's tied."
You're going to have to explain that to anyone outside of Cheyenne.
That's right. And it just dawned on me, what he was telling me, he said, I don't want to tell people what I care about, because when I tell them what I care about, and when I'm vulnerable, then they've got me. Then they know how they know where my goat's tied. They can get my goat. I think in politics, unfortunately, I mean, I think you can do vulnerability. I think with tense negotiations in politics, okay, maybe sometimes you want to cloak what it is that you really care about and love. But I think in business, it's always a better path to, I'm always trying to find how better to communicate what I care about and love. I'm trying to better create signs to where my goat is tied. Here's what I love. Here's what I'll die for. Here's why I'm here. Because people get behind that. People enlist in that. People embrace brands that know how to do that. And that's where a genuine cause comes from. They'll buy into your purpose. Simon Sinek says that branding is an advertising trust building. If you fake it, you also fake that, you know, that trust that'll shatter. So I don't know if that, I probably just took us on a little detour through the woods, but I thought in vulnerability, because there is a school of thought that says, no, it's the opposite. You have to cloak and hide and disguise what it is you care about, or the fact that you might feel fear, or the fact that you might be human. Maybe for a politician who's running a small state and knows there's 100 people he's got to arm twist in order to get turned around, okay, he doesn't want his detractors to know what he's afraid of and what he ultimately wants to accomplish. But for brands, I think customers always reward you. Well, not always, but they reward you when your loves and your fears and your anxieties and your vulnerabilities are clearly expressed.
Another thing you touch on, I think that is a great example. I think really, so almost like a counter example, and I think we'll be in a much better state when we can have some vulnerability in politics. I don't think we should wander down that path today, because we'll need another 5 hours to unwind it. But I will say, this also spoke to me. This was in your book. You talked about the power of beauty, and there was just a brilliant passage from, it's on page 69, from one of the American bishops,
Yes.
who talked about, like, teach a kid to love baseball. Don't teach him the rules. Teach a kid to love baseball, and they'll figure out this very complex rule set that is baseball, right? And they'll love it forever. The point of that whole thing was about beauty. And you said, when we share what makes us feel joy, love, awe, and enthusiasm, it's irresistible. And part of what you were saying there in the piece about vulnerability reminded me of that. You know, if the hill we defend is actually a thing of beauty, and it might just in financial services, we can abstract that, right? I mean, having a financial buffer for hard times. That is a thing of beauty. We would all agree with that now. So there is something there, but it feels like the narrative today is absolutely not about beauty. It's dark. And I spoke with Trevor Moad, who's a mental conditioning expert last week, and we talked about the same kind of theme of, it's pretty dark out there, and we've gone from one crisis to another, and it feels like that may continue. So, are we going to be seen as tone deaf if we're talking about beauty, or is it going to come out in stark relief to what people are viewing and feeling right now? What's your feel about like this very moment we're in?
Yeah, I think I hope it's the latter. I think it will be, because there's an old story. I wish I could all just the broad contours of it all. Remember when we were kids, those cartoons where someone would be playing a flute, and there'd be a basket and a cobra would come out of the basket.
Yeah, totally.
And people would be mesmerized by the cobra, staring at it. They can't look away. They're kind of frozen by it. I think ugliness and anger can do that to all of us as people. And whether it's brands and stuff, you can focus on what you detest and what you despise and what is ugly and what makes you angry. Certainly the things that annoy us can help us find problems that ache to be solved, but the only way we really get people to follow us, I think, in healthy directions is by calling to beauty, calling to, and in the context of that story you mentioned, people are beguiled by the beauty of a painting or a building or of a game played on a beautifully mowed lawn and the crack of the bat, and that creates in them a desire to play. And as they play, they learn the rules. So they go from what's beautiful to, kind of the mechanics of it. There's a great movie starring Clark Gable about branding and advertising. It's called The Hucksters, I think. You guys can look it up, but it's about this product called Beauty Soap. And the owner of Beauty Soap, Clark Gable, comes in, and the owner of Beauty Soap says, "We want people's attention." So he spits on the table. He said, "I got your attention, didn't I? Now I've got your attention. Now I can give you any message I want." And that is the attitude of some modern advertising, shock but it's very short-lived attention. Clark Gable turns it all around, of course, by saying Beauty Soap is a product based on cleanliness and beauty, and spit on the table goes against your brand. You've got to, and of course he convinces the owner to go in a different direction, and it wins out. But this problem has been with us even prior to this time of the desire, or the temptation, I should say, to use anger and ugliness as a way to get attention and then try to bring people around to your brand message. But the brands that do the opposite are the ones that really last. There's some, I think I highlight a number of them in the book who do a better job than others. Budweiser has done a great job. Under Armour has historically done a good job of appealing first to higher, more noble things that we share in common rather than our common dislikes and our common annoyances. But you do have to find, often it's that point of friction where there's a problem, does kind of alert you to where you need to bring the light of your brand to shine a different view on it. So you do need conflict, you do need problems in order to be relevant. We
got plenty of those.
Yeah.
We got no shortage of problems.
Yeah.
I think it was your book that pointed out and I went to, I'm sure it was, and I went and looked it up, the Ram truck commercial that took from Paul Harvey's speech, the American Farmers Association, I think it was in 1980 something or other. And the spot was called, and God Made a Farmer or something of that nature. I'm choking up thinking about that spot. I mean, I came out of that video bawling. And I've looked at Ram trucks differently since the moment I watched that on YouTube, which was only about, a month ago or 6 weeks ago.
Oh, so was that your first time seeing it when you went and looked it up after the
It was. I never saw, I don't remember the commercial. I must have gone to get some popcorn or something. It was a Super Bowl ad, I believe, just a couple of years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, right. It was, boy, it's, I'm getting to that age now where one year is 6. So I think it might have been 6 or 7 years ago, but it didn't even have footage. It just had still photographs, beautiful black and white photos of farmers and working men and women and animals. And it was a beautiful, beautifully read poem, very emotional. And that thing tested throughout, you know, through the roof. And a lot of brands do feel the temptation, especially in the Super Bowl. Everyone's trying to be funny. Everyone wants to have a bad comedy set, and but that's an opportunity to go against commute. Another favorite phrase from Mike Rowe, who talks about going against commute. Every brand's trying to be funny. Every brand's trying to be irreverent. Go against commute. Try something different. So if in the financial world, what is every other brand doing? Maybe they're trying to go for the cheap cry. So maybe going for a well-earned laugh or something that's lighter is the direction to go. So it depends on where the current seems to be running. You have an opportunity to stand out by resisting the current. But yeah, God Made a Farmer is one of the greatest advertisements ever made, really.
Yeah, it was truly brilliant. The other thing I just want to point out, and I think we should head toward overtime soon, because I think we'll probably have some takers. I'll explain overtime in a second, and we're going to a new URL. Everyone, I do not want you to go to the old one, because Peter's on that one right now, and my partner Peter Renton, and he's podcasting. So if you bust into overtime right now, you are going to bust into his podcast. He will not be pleased with me. That might have been.
We'll have a virtual collision.
That might have been TMI. Maybe I've just tempted our audience to go break into a podcast and sure. Podcast bomb. I don't think my audience is that type. One other concept that I think you did touch on, but I really love is taking a chance on your customers and not the other way around. And I think that's a lesson that I feel like I'm learning that a lot these days. But just unpack that a little bit for us, because I think it's a really important concept, and one that deserves some airtime.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, all these lessons are ones that I have to keep relearning too. It's funny, even before I got on the Zoom with you, I had to go reacquaint myself with my own words again. I had to look at the book to make sure that I remembered a lot of it. And all of us who work in any selling of products or services are in positions where we're asking for a sale or a call to action. We're asking someone to do something. And it's very tempting to, and I've done it countless times in my own life, which is, take a chance on me, whether I was a young copywriter or a young advisor in messaging. But the really great way to go about it is to ask, is to take a chance on your customers. Not by giving things away for free. I've known people who find out the hard way too, that there's something called, I think it's related to price anchoring, that if you give something away for free, it is valued at 0. I think the old Columbia Record House, Lester Wonderman found, they tested 3 different price points. One was free, one was $1, and one was $10. The dollar one outsold, all by a huge measure. The free one, the 0 one, tested horribly. People did not want something that had no value, and also thought, what's the trick? So when you take a chance on your customer, that doesn't mean you have to give away your value for free, but there are ways to lower the barrier, and to say, look, I'm taking a chance on you. If I'm Casper Mattress, I know that if I give you a year to return your mattress, you might use it for a year and return it cynically. But Zappos has shown us all the way. Zappos has, is it a return policy? Is it indefinite or is it just a year? I can't remember, but
I don't remember either. But it's generous.
It's super generous, and it's on everything. And they realized, they started out as shoesite.com, and then the founder, I think his name is Tony, he realized, we're not a shoe company, we're a customer service company. And so they all became about, they're taking a chance on customers. So they had a customer call and say, hey, I need a pizza delivered. And they had a customer service rep call and get a pizza ordered and delivered to that customer's house. But they also have a really generous return policy, meaning like, hey, sure, some people are going to abuse it, but most people aren't, and they're going to appreciate that we're taking a chance on them, that they might abuse it, but that's on them and not us. So those are a couple examples. I'm trying to think of how, because I know finance is so regulated, so you can't just, but I'd be interested to hear if in those models of, I'm talking about products like Casper Mattress or Zappos, are there ways in which you think that lenders and financial companies can take a chance on their customers, or at least, ask more of themselves than they do of others? Is there?
I think for sure there is, and there are parts of the financial world where you absolutely cannot. So no, I used to run a registered investment advisor, and you can't guarantee returns. You can't say, well, if we don't achieve this return, we'll give you your fees back. You can't do anything like that. But there are huge swaths of financial services where there can be more of a guarantee in the relationship. And one of the things that we think is going to go away are overdraft fees, and we're headed that way now. And but it's going to take some time.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit more of a competitive dynamic, and also technology plays into that. But the sort of fee-based nature of a lot of these large banks, large financial institutions, let's say, not just banks, is a trick. So you're battling with what can our promise be? What's our hill we're going to defend? What can our promise be? What can we do to take a chance on our customers? Quote unquote guarantee. And then what's our business model? And are we what's that word again? Not disrupting, but are we cannibalizing?
Yeah.
Are we cannibalizing ourselves? And if so, what are the repercussions?
Okay, that's interesting. And it occurs to me, I don't know, I probably haven't defined what I mean by authenticity, which I won't get too much in the weeds there, but for the audience, the helpful way to think about it for a brand is that there's something called objective authenticity, when someone created that term. And that is really, is this product what I say it is? Is it made from silk? Is it manufactured in India? Is it authentic in terms of its contents? And is our company really founded, in this city and by these people? And there's something more that I think for branding is more important, which is constructive authenticity, which relates to, are you operating from a genuine purpose that is clearly understood, and do you clearly understand the audience problem solution? Who am I talking to? What problem do they have, and how do I solve it? Are you operating, when you say that this is why we exist, and this is why we make our suits this way, this is why we generate these financial service products, because that's what a company dedicated to blank would do, kind of filling in your purpose there. So authenticity has more to do with these eternal, or I should say, embedded things that are more about your deeply held values and your purpose than about, simple manufacturing details or biographical details.
That is super helpful, and thank you for making sure that we included that, so that we have both definitions. Really, I mean, you think, yeah, obviously you have to satisfy both, but the transcendent one is the constructive sense of authenticity. So now we've just bumped up against the top of the hour. Now, do you have a few minutes? I know a lot of our audience is going to have to scoot to their next thing, but if you have a few minutes, we could jump onto overtime too. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I've got a few minutes. I don't know if there's any questions. I've got, another 10, 15 minutes or.
Cool. Let's just jump on for a minute and see if anyone wants to join us for a little one-on-one time with Mark.